The night before his birthday, Keanu Reeves sat alone in a quiet hotel room in Miami. The lights of the city sparkled outside his window, but he felt none of their energy. He had flown here quietly without telling anyone. For the world, he was a star, admired for his humility and kindness. But in that moment, he only felt the weight of loneliness pressing against his chest. Birthdays had always been hard for him. The silence around him made every tick of the clock louder, every memory of the past heavier. From the outside, people thought Keanu had everything: fame, success, money, respect. But what people didn't see were the quiet nights when the room felt too big, when the heart longed for someone to knock on the door and say, "You're not alone." The truth was, he didn't expect anyone to show up. He hadn't celebrated his birthday in years. It was easier to hide, easier to let the day pass like it was just another date on the calendar. But this year was different, even if he didn't know it yet. Far across the city, Sandra Bullock was planning something. She remembered the long talks they had years ago when they were filming together. She remembered the way his laughter carried warmth, and how he always listened carefully when others spoke. For her, Keanu was more than a co-star. He was someone who deserved kindness returned, someone who deserved to feel seen. She had heard he was in Miami, and she decided that this birthday would not pass in silence. The story begins with conflict inside Keanu's heart. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the small cake the hotel staff had left for him. It was simple, with a single candle placed in the center. He almost laughed at the sight of it. He had thought of lighting the candle, but he didn't want to make a wish. Wishes felt too fragile, too childish for a man who had carried so much loss. Yet, the night was not finished writing itself. While he stared at the cake, the phone on his table buzzed. He ignored it at first, thinking it was another message from a fan or an agent reminding him of schedules. But then it buzzed again and again, and something inside him told him to pick it up. The message was short. "Happy early birthday. I hope tomorrow you don't spend it alone." It was from Sandra. His heart paused for a moment. Memories of laughter on sets, quiet conversations between takes, and the comfort of shared respect came back all at once. He hadn't spoken to her in weeks, but here she was, reaching out at the right time. Keanu didn't reply immediately. He only placed the phone down, leaning back against the pillows, letting her words echo in his head. Outside, the Miami sky began to shift. The city was alive with music, waves crashing against the shore, and lights that painted the water in gold and silver. Somewhere in that same city, Sandra was walking with determination. She held a small envelope in her hand. Inside it, something she wanted to give him, something simple but meaningful. She had arranged for a quiet gathering by the beach, a place filled not with reporters or cameras, but with warmth, laughter, and people who would remind Keanu of the love that still surrounded him. But Keanu didn't know this yet. All he knew was that his birthday was coming, and he was alone. He blew out the single candle on the small hotel cake, watching the smoke twist into the air. He whispered to himself, almost as if trying to believe it, "It's just another day." What he didn't realize was that the next day would not be just another day. It would become a memory he would carry forever. The suspense grew silently. As the city slept, two stories began to move toward each other, his loneliness and her plan. One heart quietly breaking, another quietly preparing to heal it. The world would not see the details, but the viewers of this story would. And in those details, they would find respect, resilience, humility, and kindness. Because sometimes the biggest surprises do not come with lights and noise. They come softly from people who care, at the moment you least expect it. And so, the night closed its eyes. Keanu Reeves lay in bed, unaware that tomorrow would hold a gift not wrapped in paper, but in friendship, love, and the power of being remembered. The morning sun broke through the Miami sky, spilling golden light across the city. Waves hit the shore with a calm rhythm, but inside Keanu's hotel room, the silence was heavier than the sound of the sea. He woke up slowly, as if his body carried the weight of years of solitude. Today was his birthday, and the first thought that came into his mind was not celebration, but survival. How do you carry another year when your heart feels empty? He stood by the window, looking out at the ocean. People were already on the beach. Families, children, couples laughing, friends playing music. He saw life happening everywhere except inside his own room. He whispered to himself, almost as if speaking to the waves. Another year, just another day. Yet deep inside, a small voice fought back against the loneliness, a voice that still wanted connection. The phone on his table lit up again. Another message. This time it was longer. Sandra had written, "Don't disappear today. Promise me. Meet me at the pier at sunset. I have something for you." Keanu stared at the words for a long time. His first instinct was to avoid it, to let the day pass unnoticed. But something about the way she wrote felt different. It wasn't an invitation to a party full of cameras. It wasn't about Hollywood. It was personal, quiet, and full of heart. As he held the phone, he remembered the times they had laughed years ago. He remembered the way she always found light in heavy moments, how she could lift the mood even when the day had been long and exhausting. He realized that maybe she understood him better than most people did, and that thought, as fragile as it was, gave him a reason not to turn away. Still, the hours leading to sunset felt endless. He tried to distract himself with a walk, blending into the streets of Miami, wearing his usual simple clothes. People passed him without recognizing him at first. He walked into a small cafe, ordered a black coffee, and sat in the corner. As he sipped quietly, he overheard laughter from a nearby table. It was a group of friends celebrating a birthday, their voices full of life, their faces glowing with joy. He felt a sting in his chest, not from envy, but from longing. He wanted that feeling, the warmth of being surrounded, the comfort of knowing that someone cared enough to gather just for him. His mind drifted to the candle he had blown out last night. He thought about how he had refused to make a wish. Maybe he had been afraid to wish because wishes reminded him of things he had lost. But as he sat in that cafe, hearing laughter that wasn't his, he quietly wondered, what if I had wished for something different? What if today could still change? The hours passed slowly, like a long stretch of silence between two notes of music. He returned to his room, sat on the bed, and stared at the phone again. Sandra's message waited there, glowing like a small light in the dark. He finally typed a reply. Okay, sunset, the pier. On the other side of the city, Sandra smiled as she read his words. She had been nervous, unsure if he would agree. She had spent days preparing this, reaching out to a few close people, making sure the evening would not feel like a show, but like a memory built on kindness. She wanted Keanu to see that he was not forgotten, that even in silence, people carried him in their hearts. As the sun began to drop lower in the sky, painting the Miami horizon in shades of orange and pink, Keanu walked slowly toward the pier. Every step felt uncertain, as if he wasn't sure he was ready for whatever waited. But there was something in the air, an energy he hadn't felt in a long time. The kind of energy that comes before a surprise, before a truth revealed. When he reached the pier, he stopped. At first, he saw only the water, glowing under the fading sun. The air smelled of salt and warmth. Then, slowly, he noticed a small gathering further down. Lights flickering, voices soft but joyful. His heart beat faster. He saw Sandra standing there, her smile bright and real, holding the same envelope he had seen in her message. She waved at him, her eyes full of something he had not seen in a long time. Pure care. For a moment, Keanu froze. He felt torn between running away and stepping forward. He had spent so many years protecting himself from the weight of loss that he almost forgot how to walk into moments of love. But Sandra's presence was like gravity, pulling him closer. He took one step, then another, until he was standing right in front of her. "Happy birthday," she said softly, her voice carrying both warmth and strength. Keanu didn't answer at once. His eyes searched hers, trying to understand why she would do this, why she would care enough to stand there waiting for him. The conflict inside him was raw, part of him still guarded, part of him aching to believe. Then she handed him the envelope. "Open it later," she whispered. "For now, just be here." He looked around and saw the small gathering she had arranged. No flashing cameras, no reporters, just a few familiar faces, a table with food, the soft sound of waves behind them. It wasn't grand, but it was honest, and that honesty pierced through the loneliness he had carried for so long. In that moment, for the first time in years, Keanu realized that maybe this birthday could be different. Maybe he didn't have to spend it hiding from joy. Maybe he could allow himself to feel the gift of being remembered. And as the sun dipped lower, casting its final light across the water, the evening began to open like a story just waiting to be told. The sound of the waves filled the air as the sky turned darker, painted with soft shades of purple and deep orange. Keanu stood quietly at the pier, surrounded by the small gathering Sandra had arranged. At first, he felt like an outsider in his own celebration, as if joy belonged to others and not to him. But then he noticed something he had not seen in years. Faces lit not by cameras or fame, but by warmth, respect, and real affection. Sandra guided him closer, her hand gently touching his arm. "You don't have to say anything," she whispered, as if she knew the storm of feelings inside him. "Just let this moment be yours." Her voice was soft, but it carried strength. And in that strength, he found courage to take another step forward. The table was simple, set with food that smelled fresh and comforting. Candles flickered in the breeze, their flames steady despite the ocean wind. Keanu looked at the people around him, two of his old friends from Miami who had quietly stayed in touch, a young musician he once helped years ago, and a couple of crew members from films long past. None of them were there for fame or attention. They were there because Sandra had reminded them that kindness deserved to be returned. Still, inside Keanu, a conflict grew. He felt grateful, but at the same time, part of him struggled to believe he belonged there. Loneliness had trained him to expect silence, not laughter. He shifted uncomfortably as they sang softly, "Happy Birthday." His eyes moved toward the cake on the table. This time it wasn't a small hotel cake with one candle. It was bigger, brighter, decorated with care and surrounded by people waiting for him to make a wish. He froze. The same thought returned. Wishes felt dangerous. He had lost so much in life that the act of wishing seemed like inviting disappointment. The silence stretched as everyone waited. Sandra noticed the hesitation in his eyes, and she stepped closer. "Don't wish for something far away," she whispered, so only he could hear. "Just wish to feel today. Just today." Her words struck him deeply. For the first time, the idea of wishing didn't feel like weakness. It felt like acceptance. He closed his eyes, took a quiet breath, and let himself imagine not a future he couldn't control, but the present moment, the sound of waves, the laughter behind him, the candlelight dancing on Sandra's face, the kindness of people who chose to be there. And then, gently, he blew out the candles. Cheers filled the air, but what mattered most was the small smile that formed on his face. It wasn't forced. It wasn't for the cameras. It was real. Sandra caught it and smiled back, her eyes glistening with quiet joy. She had waited to see that smile because she knew how rare it had become. After the cake, the group sat together sharing stories. One friend told him how, years ago, Keanu had quietly paid for his daughter's school books without telling anyone. Another reminded him of the time he sat with a grieving crew member after a long shoot, just listening. As each story came out, Keanu realized something he had forgotten. While he often felt invisible, his kindness had left footprints in other lives. He had not been forgotten. Yet even in this warmth, the suspense of the evening lingered. The envelope Sandra had given him still rested in his pocket. Every time his hand brushed against it, he felt a pull of curiosity and fear. What could be inside? Why had she asked him to open it later? He decided not to look yet, letting the mystery stay with him as the night unfolded. Sandra watched him carefully. She had seen Keanu in many moments, strong, silent, kind, but tonight she saw him fragile, as if he stood on the edge of rediscovering a part of himself he had locked away. She knew the envelope carried more than words. It carried something that could change how he saw this birthday, maybe even how he saw himself. The evening grew richer. Music began softly, the young musician strumming a guitar with gentle notes that blended with the ocean breeze. The group clapped and sang along, laughter mixing with the sound of the sea. Keanu listened, and slowly, he allowed himself to join in, his voice quiet but present. And yet, even as he smiled, a shadow remained inside him. He wondered how long this moment would last. He wondered if tomorrow he would wake up to the same silence, the same emptiness. The thought made his chest tighten, but then he caught Sandra's gaze again. She looked at him as if to say, "You are not alone. Not anymore." Hours passed, and the pier grew quieter. One by one, the small group began to leave, each hugging him, each thanking him for being who he was. By the end, only Sandra remained, standing by the water with him. The waves were calmer now, the night sky filled with stars. She pointed to the ocean. "Do you know why I chose this place?" she asked. Keanu shook his head. "Because the ocean never keeps its waves. It lets them come and it lets them go. Sometimes they crash, sometimes they're soft, but no matter what, the ocean keeps moving forward. I wanted you to remember that. No matter what you faced, you are still moving forward." Her words cut through him with quiet power. He felt his throat tighten, emotions rising like the tide. For years he had carried grief, loss, and loneliness like a heavy stone. But here, in front of the ocean, with her words echoing inside him, he felt the possibility of release. His hand reached into his pocket, pulling out the envelope. He held it for a moment, staring at it in silence. Sandra didn't say anything. She only watched, letting him decide when he was ready. His fingers trembled slightly as he tore it open. Inside was a letter, handwritten with care. He began to read, his eyes moving slowly across the words. With every line, his heart pounded harder. Sandra had written truths he didn't expect, reminders of who he was beyond the fame, memories of kindness he had forgotten, promises that he was not alone in this world. And at the end, she wrote a single line that left him breathless. "Your story is not finished. This birthday is not an ending. It's a beginning." Keanu closed the letter, his eyes wet with tears he couldn't hide. For years, he had fought to carry his pain alone. But now, with Sandra beside him and the ocean in front of him, he felt something shift inside. For the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to believe that maybe he didn't have to face the rest of his journey alone. The night grew deeper, but the silence between them was no longer heavy. It was peaceful, like the calm after a storm. And in that calm, Keanu Reeves discovered that this birthday was not just another year passing. It was the start of something new, something fragile, but full of hope. The ocean stretched endlessly under the night sky, waves whispering secrets only hearts could hear. Keanu sat on the edge of the pier, the letter from Sandra folded gently in his hand. His eyes followed the stars above, but his thoughts drifted inward into memories he usually avoided. Every word in that letter had stirred something raw inside him, something he thought had been buried. Sandra sat beside him, silent, letting the sound of the waves fill the space between them. She didn't rush him, didn't press him to speak. She understood that sometimes silence was louder than any words. And in that silence, Keanu felt her presence like a steady anchor, keeping him from sinking too deep into his own shadows. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and hesitant. "You know, I didn't think I'd make it this far. Birthdays never felt like celebrations. They felt like reminders. Reminders of everything I lost." His eyes glistened as he stared into the water. "But tonight, this feels different. Like I'm allowed to breathe again." Sandra turned her head, watching him carefully. "That's why we're here. Not to erase the past, but to remind you that you're still here. And that matters." Her words were simple, but they cut through the walls he had built around his heart. A sudden gust of wind swept across the pier, carrying with it the smell of salt and the faint sound of music from a distant boat. Keanu shivered slightly, not from the cold, but from the weight of what he was feeling. For so long, he had lived like a shadow, present but not fully alive. Tonight, for the first time in years, he felt the possibility of stepping back into the light. As they sat together, Sandra reached into her bag and pulled out a small box wrapped in simple paper. She handed it to him quietly. "Open it," she said, her eyes soft but filled with anticipation. Keanu hesitated, his fingers brushing against the paper as if it might vanish. He unwrapped it slowly, revealing a worn leather journal. On the first page, Sandra had written, "This is for the stories you haven't told yet. Don't let them stay locked inside." He traced the words with his fingers, his throat tight. "I don't know if I can," he whispered. "You can," Sandra replied firmly. Because your words, your stories, they aren't just yours. They belong to the people who need them, the ones who need hope, the ones who think they're alone. He closed the journal, holding it close. Something inside him shifted again, like a heavy door slowly opening. It wasn't easy. It wasn't sudden. But it was real. The night deepened, but the pier remained alive with a quiet kind of magic. The two of them walked slowly along the wooden planks, the moonlight painting their shadows on the ground. Sandra stopped suddenly, turning to him. "Keanu, do you know why I came here for you? Why I couldn't let this birthday pass in silence?" He shook his head gently, waiting. "Because you've given so much to others without asking for anything back. I couldn't stand the thought of you sitting alone, thinking no one remembered. You needed to be reminded that you're not invisible. You matter." Her voice trembled at the edges, filled with emotion she could no longer hide. Keanu's chest tightened. He had heard words of praise all his life. But this was different. This wasn't about movies or fame. This was about him, the man, not the star. He felt tears building again, but this time he didn't fight them. He let them fall, each one carrying years of pain, loneliness, and silent battles. The waves crashed harder now, as if echoing the release of everything he had carried. And then something unexpected happened. From behind them came the sound of footsteps. Keanu turned, confused. Out of the shadows walked someone he hadn't seen in years. It was one of his closest childhood friends, a man he had lost touch with after tragedy pulled their lives apart. Keanu froze, his mind racing to catch up with what his eyes were seeing. "Happy birthday, brother," the man said softly, his voice breaking. Keanu's breath caught. He felt as if the world had stopped moving. Sandra smiled faintly, her plan unfolding piece by piece. She had tracked down people from his past, people who carried pieces of his story, and brought them back to him. His friend stepped forward, pulling him into a tight embrace. The hug was long, heavy with unspoken words. Keanu closed his eyes, holding on, as if afraid the moment might disappear. When they finally pulled apart, he whispered, "I thought I lost you." "You didn't," his friend replied. "I was always here, waiting for you to find your way back." The shock of the reunion shook him deeply. It was more than a surprise. It was a reminder that even the connections he thought were gone forever could return. Carrying light into his darkness, Sandra watched the two men with quiet satisfaction. She knew this was just the beginning. She had planned more for him, pieces of a larger surprise that would unfold step by step. Tonight was not about one moment of happiness. It was about rebuilding a man who had given so much, but received so little in return. The night stretched on, filled with stories, laughter, and tears. Keanu listened as his childhood friend shared memories he had forgotten, nights of laughter, small adventures, dreams they once spoke about under the stars. With every word, the wall around his heart cracked further, and yet, even with the warmth surrounding him, there was suspense in the air. Because Sandra's surprise was not finished. There were still more pieces waiting to fall into place. Pieces that would test him, move him, and change him in ways he couldn't yet imagine. As the waves rolled against the pier and the stars burned brighter, Keanu Reeves realized this was no ordinary birthday. It was a journey, and he had only just stepped onto the path. The pier was quieter now, but inside Keanu's heart there was a storm he could not control. The letter from Sandra still rested in his pocket. The journal sat on the table beside him, and his childhood friend stood nearby, watching him with eyes that carried decades of shared history. Each of these things was heavy, each one pushing him toward a truth he had avoided for years, that he had spent so much time surviving that he had forgotten how to live. Sandra remained close, but she did not press him. She simply stayed, her presence steady, her silence full of meaning. She knew what was coming, and she knew it would shake him even deeper. She had not brought his old friend here by accident. There were more people waiting, more surprises planned, each one meant to return a missing piece of his soul. Keanu leaned against the wooden railing, staring at the ocean. His voice was quiet, broken by pauses. "I don't know if I deserve this. All of you being here, all of this effort. I spent so long locked away in myself. I never gave anyone the chance to reach me." His throat tightened as he spoke. "What if this disappears tomorrow? What if it all slips away again? His childhood friend stepped closer, his hand on Keanu's shoulder. You don't have to ask what if anymore. Tonight proves you're not alone. Sometimes we all drift apart, but true connections never die. They wait for the moment we're ready to see them again. His words hit Keanu with unexpected force. He felt his eyes blur, but before he could answer, another sound rose in the distance. The sound of footsteps, soft but steady, moving closer through the night air. Keanu turned, confusion flashing across his face. Out of the shadows came a figure he never expected. It was a woman he had once worked with on a film years ago, someone who had quietly admired his kindness but had drifted away from his life. Her presence was like a memory come alive. She walked toward him slowly, carrying a small box in her hands. "Happy birthday, Keanu," she said gently, her smile trembling with emotion. He blinked, stunned.
"You here?"
She nodded. "Sandra called me. She told me you needed to be reminded of who you are, and I couldn't say no. Not after everything you did for me when I was struggling back then." Keanu's mind filled with flashes of the past. He remembered the long nights on set when she had doubted herself, when he had sat with her, encouraging her to believe in her own worth. He had forgotten those moments, but she hadn't. She handed him the small box. "This is something I kept for years. I want you to have it now." He opened the box slowly, his hands trembling. Inside was a photograph, one taken years ago during a break on set. In the picture, he was laughing, unguarded, surrounded by people who loved being near him. It wasn't the image the world saw of the lonely man. It was the image of someone alive, someone joyful. His chest ached as he stared at it. The photograph felt like proof of a man he thought had vanished. He closed his eyes, holding it tightly, as if afraid it might vanish like a dream. Sandra stepped closer, her voice soft but firm. "That's the man I wanted you to remember. The man who gave hope to others without realizing it. That's still you, Keanu. He's not gone. He's here. You just buried him under the weight of everything you've carried." Tears rolled freely down his face now. His childhood friend stood beside him, the woman from his past on the other side, and Sandra just in front of him. Together, they surrounded him, their presence breaking the walls that had been his prison for so long. He tried to speak, but his voice cracked. "Why me? Why do you all care this much?" Sandra reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "Because you've spent your whole life reminding others they matter. It's time someone reminded you." His heart beat faster, emotions rising until he could barely hold them back. He looked at each of them, and for the first time in years, he let himself say what he always avoided. "I was afraid. I thought if I let people close, I'd lose them too. I thought pain was all I had left. But tonight, you've shown me something different." His friend smiled softly. "Tonight is just the beginning." Keanu turned back toward the ocean, the photograph still in his hand. The stars seemed brighter now, the waves calmer, as if the world itself was answering the change inside him. But then Sandra leaned closer, her voice low and filled with meaning. "There's one more surprise," she whispered. Keanu's head snapped toward her, confusion filling his eyes. "More?" She nodded, her expression unreadable but full of intent. "Yes, one more. But you'll have to trust me. It won't be easy. It might even hurt. But you need to face it. Only then will this birthday truly mean something." The suspense thickened, her words hanging in the air like an unspoken promise. Keanu felt his chest tighten again, this time not from loneliness but from the unknown. What could be waiting for him that would be harder than this? What truth could be hidden in the shadows that still needed to be faced? The ocean roared louder as if echoing the storm inside him. The journal lay waiting for unwritten stories. The photograph burned into his mind, the letter pressed close to his heart. Everything pointed to one truth. This birthday was no longer about surviving another year. It was about stepping into a beginning he had never expected. And now, with Sandra's final words, he knew the night was not over. The hardest part was yet to come. The night had grown deep, the pier almost empty, but Keanu felt more awake than he had in years. His heart was heavy with memories, yet lighter with the warmth of everything he had just experienced. The letter, the journal, the photograph, the return of his childhood friend, the quiet presence of Sandra. But now her words echoed in his mind like a bell he couldn't ignore. There's one more surprise." He turned to her, his eyes sharp with curiosity but also trembling with fear. "What do you mean?" he asked quietly. Sandra didn't answer right away. She looked out over the ocean, her face calm but her eyes serious. Finally, she said, "There is someone you need to see, someone you've avoided for too long. I wasn't sure if it was the right thing to do, but I knew if tonight was truly about healing, it had to happen." Keanu's chest tightened. "Who?" Before she could reply, soft footsteps echoed again against the wooden pier. Keanu turned and his breath caught in his throat. Walking slowly toward him was his sister, someone he had been distant from for years. Their relationship strained by time, grief, and silence. His knees felt weak. He whispered her name as if speaking it might make her vanish. But she didn't vanish. She came closer, her eyes wet with tears, her hands trembling as she reached out. "Happy birthday, Keanu," she said softly, her voice cracking under the weight of emotions too long held back. He stood frozen, torn between running and collapsing. Their history was full of shadows, arguments left unresolved, moments of love buried under misunderstandings, grief that had torn them apart instead of bringing them closer. For years, he had carried the guilt of not reaching out, of letting silence build walls where words could have built bridges. Now, standing in front of her, all the years of distance collapsed. "I didn't think you'd ever want to see me again," he whispered, his voice almost breaking. "I always wanted to," she replied, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I just didn't know how to begin. But when Sandra called me, I knew I couldn't waste another moment. Not when you've carried so much alone." Keanu's body shook as he stepped forward, closing the distance. When their arms wrapped around each other, the dam inside him broke. He held her tightly, his tears falling into her shoulder, hers soaking into his shirt. The embrace was more than a reunion. It was the healing of a wound that had stayed open far too long. Sandra watched from a distance, her own eyes shining. This was the moment she had been waiting for. She had planned surprises, yes, but this was more than that. This was the truth. Keanu didn't just need reminders of who he was. He needed to mend what was broken, to reconnect with the roots of his life that gave him strength. The three of them sat together on the pier, the sound of waves wrapping around them like music. His sister spoke of the years they had lost, the times she had wished he was there, the moments she had wanted to share but hadn't. Keanu listened, his chest aching, but also healing with every word. He shared his side too, admitting his fears, his regrets, his struggles with loss. There were tears, pauses heavy with emotions, but also laughter, soft and hesitant at first, then stronger, as if they were learning how to be together again. As the hours passed, something shifted inside Keanu. The loneliness that had haunted him for years didn't vanish completely, but it loosened its grip. He realized that pain and joy could exist together, that healing wasn't about erasing the past, but allowing himself to carry it with kindness instead of shame. Sandra finally leaned closer, her voice gentle. "This is why tonight mattered. Not because it's your birthday, but because it's the day you remembered who you are and who you still have." Keanu nodded, his eyes shining with gratitude. He looked at his sister, at Sandra, at his old friend standing nearby, and felt something he hadn't felt in years, a sense of belonging. The ocean roared one last time, the stars above glowing like silent witnesses. Keanu pulled the journal close, the letter still safe in his pocket, the photograph tucked inside the cover. He knew tomorrow wouldn't be perfect. There would still be nights of silence, still moments of grief, but tonight proved that he wasn't meant to walk through it alone. For the first time in years, Keanu Reeves smiled, not because he wanted to hide his pain, but because he truly felt the weight lifting. This birthday was not just another day. It was the day he was reminded that kindness returns, that love survives distance, and that even broken hearts can find a way back to wholeness. He stood on the pier, looking out at the horizon. The first light of dawn was beginning to rise, painting the ocean in silver and gold. Sandra touched his arm softly and said, "Happy birthday, Keanu. A new chapter begins today," he whispered back, his voice steady but full of emotion. Yes, a chapter I'll never forget.